Hello and good morning everyone, and thank you for joining our Microsoft Azure and StorSimple webinar today. So we have Marc Esmiley from SystemsUp here who will be going through the webinar with you.
Right. Morning everyone. Apologies, I am suffering a little bit of a cold, so I am going to sound a little bit muffled with my speaking, but I will still try and speak as clearly as I can. So as Amy said, if there's any questions during the presentation, please raise your hand, shout out, and we'll try and answer them during the presentation or after in the Q&A session. So today's session is going to be about hybrid cloud storage. In particular, we're going to be focusing on Azure StorSimple, which is essentially to bridge the gap between cloud services and on-premise storage. A very quick introduction to SystemsUp. We're an SMA. We work in partnership with Byte, with Microsoft, and some other public cloud technologies. We are kind of technical focused, and that's like what we'd like to focus on. So it's only techies essentially. So today we're essentially going to be focusing on common storage challenges. We want to review what enterprise customers are seeing today, look into Microsoft solutions. So obviously that is, StorSimple focus. And looking on to how workflows can actually be used with this technology. So looking at the StorSimple 8000 series, which is the newer of the series, and looking at what these hybrid arrays can actually do, essentially. Then we'll dive a little bit deeper into the benefits of the Azure actual portal and what it can do. And finally, we'll look at some high-level quick wins potentially, and different aspects like that. So hopefully everyone's heard of Azure. I'm sure they have. And I like to start off with this slide really just to show that Azure is, is larger than just a data center. It is software as a service. You've got traffic manager in there. You've got big data. You've got identity. You've got platform as a service. You've got things like SQL as a service, websites, cloud services, and traditional infrastructure as a service, machines, networking, storage, etc. And as you can see there on the slide, it covers different aspects. So the platform, is not just one data center. It's multiply split out through regions and availability groups. And it's essentially making sure that your services that you put in there are redundant and resilient. And something that I like to kind of click onto is that the earliest side is a little bit of how Azure started off, and as you can see here, how it's kind of expanded. And this catalog of services I personally think is really interesting because it shows how it's actually expanding. So you've got the operational insights under the management elements there. But essentially, that's that's helping manage your environment not only in Azure but also in other public cloud providers and on-prem. You've got other services in there as well that traditionally that you might be familiar with remote apps, so RDS for provisioning applications. And essentially, this is to demonstrate how the Azure platform has moved on and developed throughout time, which is quite interesting, really. So, onto storage. Common storage challenges, really. So, as everyone is probably familiar with, storage grows. Storage is really difficult to actually map to say how much storage you're going to need today and how much storage you're going to need later on. And the common constraint is that you have to buy for your infrastructure sprawl and actually your data growth rates. Now, pinning data growth rates is obviously another difficult aspect because it's very difficult to say what replication needs you need for making sure your storage is available and redundant, and also what particular unknown projects may come up in the future. So this is something that obviously, hopefully, you're all familiar with, and there's kind of certain areas. So Microsoft has obviously seen that issue, and this is where StorSimple comes in. So StorSimple is a physical storage appliance. As you see, it's a normal iSCSI chat authentication, obviously if required, but essentially it is an on-prem SAN. An on-prem SAN is managed like a traditional on-prem SAN. It compresses, it has deduplication and automatic tiering. I'll dive into the tiering aspect of it in a minute, but I really kind of want to focus on the aspects of StorSimple. So it is essentially helping users actually manage their storage environment on-premise with also connecting it to Azure. So as you can see there, that what it's actually doing is using a StorSimple manager to manage your physical on-prem environment and your Azure environment there. So it's your connection to the cloud, to say. And some of you might be familiar with the older series, the 5000 and 7000 range. And this is something that the 8000 range is obviously newer and has certain different availabilities with it. The 7000, 5000s were directly managed by URL, directly to each of the SAN. But 8000 is done from the Azure portal. So this means if you have 1, 10, 20 Azure StorSimple devices, you can manage them all from the same window, essentially. So it is very, very useful. The array itself has a protection method in it, so you've got your local and cloud-based snapshots. Local snapshots are obviously held locally on the device, and cloud snapshots are tiered off to Azure, so for your protection. So, how the tiering works, very interesting. So at the very top of your StorSimple device, you've got the SSD layer. That is your essentially your hot area. Moving down, you've got your SaaS layer, which is warm, and then you've got your cloud, which is cold. So all your devices, as you can see there, will be writing to the SSD layer and reading from the SSD layer. So this is obviously to give you, your IOPS requirement and actually help address any kind of application access tiering for the business. But when obviously all applications don't write to SSD and hold SSD storage all the time, so this is where the SaaS layer comes in to essentially tier data down. So a traditional tiering solution here. The only difference being is that once data is cold, it will be tiered off to the cloud, so off the actual physical StorSimple device. And essentially this is, to help keep the SaaS and SSD layer used to its full capacity. So you haven't got more redundant storage needs sitting, or files sitting on the actual StorSimple device. The iSCSI SAN can be presented to traditional iSCSI initiators, so Red Hat, Windows. It's also supported on Hyper-V, KVM, and VMware. So it's essentially, an iSCSI target, so it's widely supported, and Microsoft have got some good information on actually connecting it to the different devices as well. In the background on the Azure account, it's essentially connecting to Azure storage, so it's using blob-based storage, if anyone's familiar with that. And the data being moved up to an Azure storage account is encrypted, so it's data encrypted in transit and it's data encrypted at rest as well. So it's very good for protection as well. So essentially, you own that customer key, so it's not something that Microsoft owns. So if you don't want your data to be accessed, you obviously, you can keep that hidden. And then you can see that, the cloud snapshots are essentially for making sure that your redundant storage is actually available, and hopefully reducing your enterprise storage costs there. So the common challenges with storage. Storage is complex and storage is expensive. Obviously, I'm kind of stating the obvious here. And testing your storage is always difficult. Now, traditional tapes, which personally I'm on a mission to get rid of because they're not really fitting the business needs these days. To actually do a restore from tape is very, very difficult. And not to hit a source point, but it'd be interesting to see who's actually, if you are still using off-tape or disk-to-disk backups, who's actually managed to go through a full BCDR practice and actually restore tape and make sure you can actually access that data. I know personally it's not something easy to do, it's time-consuming, and sometimes you restore the data from tape and it's not actually relevant. And obviously these are quite expensive to store and they're not always kind of quick to restore. So, traditional backups are kind of not really fit for purpose, we're finding today. And the environment sprawl with disks, tape libraries and tape drives, replicated storage is often quite complex to actually manage. If you've got 2 or 3 data centers or more, data replicating between them, and then data being backed up to disk and then tape, It's very difficult to manage. And growth again comes with that. If you're replicating data between two SAN arrays, it's very difficult to understand actually how much data that's going to consume. So how can StorSimple help? As you can see here, going back to the backup and storage recovery, the StorSimple provides an enterprise class storage with resilient networking and disks. Typically, as I said before, it is an enterprise SAN, so everything in the StorSimple device itself is of kind of ×2. So it has two heads or two brains to say. It is, head A and head B, typical SAN storage array elements there, with redundant networking for both data connections and backup connections. So you have your own management environment and your own SCSI environment within the StorSimple device, and it's set up and split up separately, just in case you get a failure of a NIC, etc., or a power supply as well. And the snapshots are effectively only taking blocks that have changed since the last snapshot. So obviously your first snapshot may be larger than the next one's going on, but any blocks that are changed ongoing, that's what will be recorded in the metadata, and that's what will be shipped to Azure. So essentially that's keeping your traffic flow and the requirement on your pipe lower, hopefully, than replicating whole SAN array changes essentially. And once the snapshot is in Azure, it can quite easily be recovered by either pushing it to another StorSimple device, the same StorSimple device, or even the virtual StorSimple device, which essentially is an appliance that sits in Azure, or you can actually, in private beta at the moment, there is the new one, the 8020, which will sit on-prem. And essentially that is to decrypt the data so you can access and check your backups. So why consider cloud? It's obviously, I've been going on about it now for a couple of minutes. It is really to address the speed, the scale, and economics there. The speed of recovering backups is challenging. It is not something that can be done quickly using tapes. On your growth rate as well there, as you can see, as your growth continues to grow, as storage does, it's hopefully not to address and not to complicate that environment. And this is really just to show, your actual local storage needs are usually quite low. Most businesses have to retain data for 7+ years, or usually the term forever is used, which is obviously very difficult to actually keep. And keeping all that data on-prem or in tapes, in a service is quite difficult, and it's very, very expensive. Using small, cheap storage, essentially what Azure offers, helps your data grow using StorSimple to actually access the data that's being used. But then when that older data comes along, you can actually transition that off to the cloud, making use of the whole solution. Now these figures are obviously just an example. They're not exactly fit for everyone, but it's just interesting to look at. And as Azure grows, it's quite interesting to see here. This is the snapshot that was taken a little bit ago now. So you can see how many objects are actually stored in Azure. So this is not something that's kind of used on and off. The blob storage is rated very highly, and in the Gartner reports as well, it is growing as well. But it's quite useful to know that the actual back end of Azure that StorSimple is connecting to is a widely used aspect there. And there's a little comparison to Amazon, because Amazon S3 is always the common examples used to compare blob storage to, or Azure blob storage. So talking about Azure blob storage, it's good to touch upon how redundant and what you actually get for your money. So each Azure data center holds a minimum, and that's probably something to actually focus on. It is a minimum of 3 copies of your data across different disk arrays. Now obviously this data is encrypted, so it's not something to worry about that your data is being sprawled and you don't have access to it and you don't know where it sits. You will be able to geofence this into certain regions. So if you want to geofence it to Amsterdam, and Ireland. You obviously can do that to Europe. You can do that over to the different regions within Azure as well. And obviously the advantage of this is that if Microsoft in its data centers, because it is a service, has a failure of a disk array, your data will still be protected because you'll have at least a minimum of 2 copies remaining. And as you go up, as your data is copied there, you can see that you're hopefully very well protected. And the good thing about the Azure Blob Storage as well is it's API, open APIs are supported as well, so you can actually query where data is and actually get a good example of where your data is being held and how much data is being held, which is always interesting to look at. And then you can look at actually expanding that out for a small cost. I don't really like to talk about cost in all honesty. I like kind of focus on the solution element. You can look at actually enabling geo-replication for your data. So using this example here of the Europe data centers, you've got Amsterdam, Dublin. And essentially, a tick box on your storage account, you can enable geo-replication, which doubles your copies. So you're talking about 6 copies here across 2 separate data centers, and of course data centers are different racks, so you could be talking about 6 different racks of storage there that you're getting for, I think it's 10, 12p per gigabyte. So it's very difficult to compare this to an on-prem solution to say actually how much will storage cost an on-prem. If you wanted to split your storage out through 6 different SAN devices and replicate that over 6 times, I'm sure that would be probably a little bit more expensive than 12p or 10p per gig. But of course, it's just an example. So coming back to StorSimple itself, it's kind of want to touch upon actually the connecting of the device and making use of the on-prem solution. So essentially, it is connected to an Azure subscription. So anyone with an Azure subscription can obviously create a volume on the StorSimple device, set up a backup schedule, and assign it to each backup. Each backup schedule can be assigned to a volume. So it means that you can have multiple volumes, multiple LUNs to say, and have them protected at different schedules. So if you've got a business critical application, you can obviously be backing that up every 10 minutes or every hour. And if you've got less important data to say, you can have that backing up maybe once every other day or every 6 hours or every week. It does varies. And the storage can here, as you can see, can be presented to physical or virtual devices. So that's really passing the iSCSI connection or initiator either to the VMware or hypervisor level or Hyper-V, or directly to the operating system, or even a physical server. If you want a physical server to have direct connect storage, this is something that can easily be done. And essentially, you've got there is that in this example, you've got a 10 terabyte iSCSI volume being directly presented to the operating system there. And in the background, you've got the StorSimple taking the snapshots and backing up to the blob storage in Azure, which is obviously not service affecting, taking it away from the actual application layer, which is quite good for performance levels. Another useful idea is to have your volume shadow copies are supported by StorSimple. So you can obviously keep local copies on the operating system layer as well. So that's up to about 64 local copies to restore that will be cached locally. So comparing the older slide of traditional backups to cloud snapshots, focusing on the fact that local snapshots are then actually, the snapshot process happens as a local snapshot and is then copied off to Azure, deduplicated, deduplicated and compressed before being migrated up to Azure. And a snapshot can simply be restored from the Azure portal. First, it will scan the metadata on the target device. So if you're storing it to the same device, it will look to see what blocks have been changed, what information is missing, pull down the metadata table, and actually start bringing down the data as required. And that's quite important, really, because it's pulling down the data as required instead of pulling down the entire block. So if you're storing a 10 terabyte volume and you're only trying to get access to one file, the metadata is obviously very small. You won't be pulling down that 10 terabyte volume. You actually only be pulling down whatever that actual file size is. So if it's a 1 gigabyte file, you'll be pulling down 1 gig instead of 10 terabytes, which obviously prioritizes recovering of that information, and it doesn't have you sitting there watching a restore file or the dreaded Windows kind of timings to say that's how long it's going to be. And the snapshot configuration is almost set it and forget about it. Snapshots are taken, they're taken locally, they're uploaded, they're deleted locally, and that's it. It saves space physically on your StorSimple device, and the good thing about it is you can monitor these and test restores from the Azure portal, being confident that your actual backups are happening and they're actually working effectively. And as you can see there, that's kind of summarizing the benefits. And what this is really to do is to truly eliminate tapes. I'm not sure how many in the call are using tapes. You'll find that there's a common theme that I keep going on about them. But I think that it's good to have faith when you're sitting in front of that business to say, how confident are you that you can restore your backups from a week ago or a month ago or even 7 years ago. You can confidently say, yes, we're happy, we've tested it last year, or we tested it 6 months ago, or even we tested it once a month, and we're happy. And all these tests that are being done are not service affecting, so the users aren't constantly being pushed back or pulled forward about all these changes and backups that are happening in the background. So essentially, cutting down to kind of the bottom line is it's saving time, and also if you're saving time, you're saving money. You're improving data protection and recoverability, and actually you'll be able to test your DR scenarios. So reducing administration time, all the planning, deployment, storage growth, storage migrations, all these elements essentially reduce your cost and save money and enable efficiency really within the business. And there's a lot of details about storage management being made simple, and essentially it's moving it more to an automated model with the hybrid storage, and less kind of nix, finish, a little bit more clunky that you can argue that the traditional way of managing storage can be. And it can also move your budget. There's obviously, I'll hand over to John later on to talk about the options, but there's options to obviously do a CapEx to OpEx model, which is great. There's also an option of doing CapEx to get credits to burn down on. But again, I don't really want to touch on that. I'll leave that to John to kind of focus on. But essentially, it is better value pay consumption. So it's a pay-as-you-go almost model, and also use other services in DR, snapshots, cloud backups, and also maybe reducing your in-house SAN or even making it redundant, which I'm sure would please a lot of people, because renewing a SAN hardware refresh or paying for a new disk shelf isn't the cheapest. So yeah, definitely. So you can look at the potential, some examples of workloads that we've used for StorSimple. So you've got data recovery there, obviously. So restoring a volume to the virtual StorSimple device sitting in Azure, you can see at the top there. Migrating data. Now obviously, because your data is being snapshotted locally and then tiered off to Azure, what you can do with the virtual StorSimple device is actually spin up that data in Azure and start to test with it. And this is a good way that we've seen of actually migrating data into Azure, because obviously all data into Azure is free. All data out of Azure is charged at a premium. So if you're moving a lot of data into Azure and testing it and then deleting it, it's actually not, it is a low cost efficiency. It's only the staff cost you need to worry about there. And this is great for testing application data. So if you want to move maybe a SQL database up there or a Windows file servers up there, you can move that up there by essentially cloning the snapshot and actually testing the data in Azure, which is fantastic. And obviously that kind of moves on to the deployment and test, mounting data, maybe testing it with a new version of Windows OS. So if you're maybe doing your DFS, file services, your namespaces, you might want to test moving from 2008 to 2012. Your data is already up in Azure. Copy it, deploy it to your 2012 DFS namespace, and then hopefully tick in the box to say it works, and you've got your full upgrade cycle tested without actually affecting any users. And this is, kind of, we see this quite a lot of enterprise businesses are actually using these models to move on-premise solutions to Azure. Well, that's quite good there. And this is quite this graphic is really to demonstrate that the data recovery times. Recovering a tape is not quick. If somebody says it is, I'm be very interested to have a conversation offline about that. But really, what we're talking about is the way that the StorSimple restores metadata tables and then actually restoring the data as required. It helps reduce that time, depending on what size of volume, it doesn't really matter, to a lower recovery time. So kind of your RTO is being dropped heavily there, which is very, very good. And that's obviously just an example there. So the StorSimple devices I touched upon earlier is managed from Azure. So if you've got two data centers here, an example, you've got production data in both data center 1 and 2, and essentially you're managing your volumes, all your storage, and all your actual physical devices as well from Azure, including virtual StorSimple devices. So if you've got data being moved up from data center 1 and 2, and it's being decrypted and used by the virtual StorSimple device in Azure, it's still all managed from the same portal. And it's very useful obviously for an admin because he's not having to jump to one SAN and then another SAN and then another portal to look at data to see what's actually happening. It's very, very useful. And the same is you can take a block or a volume and either move it and fail it over to data center, let's say from data center 1 to 2, or if you wanted to copy a volume from data center 1, you can just present it to the virtual StorSimple device or the physical StorSimple device on the other data center. So lots of kind of able to cross-pollinate your storage if required, or fail over if you have a site problem, or if you're doing an upgrade on the, for instance, site LAN or data center 1 there. It gives you a variety essentially. So I did touch upon the 5,000 and 7,000 device. I'm not sure if anyone's using them at the moment. I want to touch on really the main focus of the 8,000 range, because the 7,000s in comparison the 8,000 in comparison to the 7,000s are a lot heavier in performance. The whole model was revisited by Microsoft, and essentially it's a whole new 10 gig backbone iSCSI connections that are sitting in them instead of the 1 gig, along with the management portals and the actual core brunt of the devices themselves. It is essentially the 81,000 is the smaller device, the 86 is the bigger one. The main difference between them is essentially double storage. Same power, both have 10 gig connections for iSCSI, 1 gig connections for management connection. The 86 is just basically has another shelf, as you can see demonstrated in the picture there. So it's for the more raw storage requirement. So, and what I mean by that really is, if I just to the other side there, you can see the comparisons of the locally available SSD storage. So you got the 800 gig on the 81 and the 2 terabyte on the 86. Now obviously it varies on the capacity because you've got more local storage there. And each of the devices can obviously grow. The 81 being 2U, sorry, and the 86 being 2Us. But both devices will function and are managed in the same way. The only real difference between them is the amount of storage, because it is essentially another shelf hung underneath for the 86. And going to the virtual StorSimple device, it's something to just give you a little comparison there. As you can see, they're a lot smaller because they're mainly used really to decrypt data in Azure. These are not really designed for production workflows, so we wouldn't necessarily recommend them being used 24/7 by people. They're there to decrypt the data and move on to your testing platform, or maybe to help migrate your data actually into Azure. And as you can see, essentially what they are is it's a virtual machine image in Azure there. So for running that virtual StorSimple device is something to consider in the back of your mind. You will be charged for an A3 machine using the 810, and the 8020 is a little bit higher as well. Both use standard kind of Azure storage. The 8020 is using the premium storage, so you've got a higher storage cost there as well. So this is something to consider. And moving on to the the kind of economics, traditional hybrid cloud storage versus on-prem cloud storage. Obviously, again, this is an example. It's not something that's dead fixed. You can see the comparisons there. The storage array associated software is something that's very interesting to look at. This is the StorSimple device is gifted to you with a commitment to Azure, and by that I mean anything within Azure. Again, I'll let John talk more detail about that in a minute. But the actual cost of the physical StorSimple device is, in inverted brackets, free, because it is with your with your Azure consumption. It's actually gifted to you, and also your backups, your tapes, things like this. All you're really charged on in that aspect is the raw storage costs. So not storage that's held locally on the SAM, only storage that's deduped, compressed, and snapshotted up to Azure. So you're talking about a very, very low footprint on storage there, because actually it's just your backups, essentially. So it's kind of interesting to see there, the advantages on the right-hand side is really, you've got rid of tapes, you've got a secondary DR site, which is essentially Azure. You could, geo-replicating that, you could have potentially 2 data centers there as your backup, and increasing time and proficiency really for your internal staff and the business. And just to help summarize that there, it's kind of my main areas to focus on really is essentially lowering the traditional enterprise storage costs, focusing on actually automating data protection, so you're not there managing your snapshots, looking at your snapshots, saying if they were successful, if they were not. All are tied in quite nicely to alerting from the Azure portal. So if your backups fail, or if your replication goes down, or your StorSimple goes down, these are all SNMP, alerts, etc., that can be tied into your traditional monitoring systems, or even you can just send an emailed alert to your service desk or managed service. And really, point 3 there is to innovate the management of the actual storage. So providing IT as a service essentially to the organisation and spending less time managing the actual growth of the device for your storage. So I kind of want to bring it to a little bit of a close there. And what would be quite good actually, I don't know if I haven't really been looking at question windows because obviously I've been going on, but I've got my details are up there obviously. So feel free to reach out to me if you do have any questions. Obviously, while John's speaking, I'll look at the questions box and see if anything comes through. But happy to answer anything offline. But I just want to thank you for your time. And if I don't speak to you, I'll let John take over now. Cheers.
Can you move it over to the next slide? Okay, hi, so I'm John Gavidis, I'm the cloud lead at Bytes, and what I'm going to cover is basically an interesting offer that exists between now and June 2016. So effectively, from what you've heard so far, as you can imagine, you can use Azure for infrastructure, platform, for SQL services, Hadoop, Internet of Things, anything you actually want to use it for. And as long as your commitment is over either $60,000 for the first year or $100,000, then Microsoft gives you one of those 2 appliances. Now, to give you an idea of this offer, if you were to purchase that appliance from Seagate or another supplier, that would cost you, for the 8,100 would cost you $100,000, and for the 8,600 would be $160,000. However, if you were to make an Azure commitment of around $60,000, which is about 49,000 pounds, then you get gifted one of those appliances. So for $60,000, you will get gifted the 8100 series, and for $100,000 commitment, which you can use for anything you want in Azure, you get gifted the 8600 series. The only other cost you incur is shipping charges, and of course VAT, which you can claim back. Shipping charges are circa about $2,500, but we can take care of that and encompass all this with the order. In addition, you get some deployment funding, which for $60,000 is circa $9,000 funding, which you can use partly to install the appliance, and then you can use the rest of the money with your system integrator to either help you with deployment of Azure services or setting up a SQL farm, whatever you need in Azure. So that's the main offer. So in order to qualify for that, you need to sign an enterprise agreement, and as well as obviously that funding and StorSimple, you get a discount that is associated with an enterprise agreement. Now this is for new customers or new EA agreements. If you're already in an EA agreement, so if you have, let's say, more than 4 months remaining till your anniversary, you can actually get one of those appliances pro rata. But let me explain that. Let's say you have 10 months remaining in your agreement. Instead of having to pay $60,000 for a brand new EA agreement, what you can do is pay pro rata the cost of an appliance. So you make a top-up of your Azure commitment, which roughly works about $5,000 a month. So if you have 10 months remaining, you make an Azure commitment for $50,000 and you get gifted a StorSimple appliance. If you only have 4 months left, then you only make a commitment for additional commitment of $20,000 to get that appliance. So the pro rata service is also very significant for existing customers that perhaps are running out of their Azure usage, the commitment they made, so they want to top it up. By topping it up, you get gifted a StorSimple appliance. And the only thing you need to pay on top of that installation, but we typically make an application to Microsoft, and hopefully we can get the money so you don't have to pay any installation charges. So to recap, for a brand new agreement, you pay $60,000 or $100,000 to get gifted one of those appliances. For an existing agreement, you pay pro rata for the months remaining. Okay? That's it. I'm done unless somebody has any questions.
Can you choose one?
Oh yes, so we've got Robert Papier here from SystemsUp. You just want to say a few words?
Hi everyone. I'm going to talk very quickly on 2 points that John made. First of all, there's the $9,000 enablement money, which is approximately £6,000 for new subscriptions. Actually, there's a very formal process that we will take you through, because we're completely aware that the StorSimple device is tremendous value, but it's only tremendous value if you use the credits that you've committed to. So we have a structured workshop that we've agreed with Microsoft, which takes you through a planning session of how you can get the best value from Azure, what services you should look at, what workloads, and it also includes a feedback session after 90 days and then after 180 days to see how it's gone. Do you need extra assistance, etc. If required, it also includes documentation, enablement documentation, customized for your usage. The last point I'll make is where you're not a new Azure subscription, there is a process for getting money from Microsoft to help with the installation costs, which we will take you through. I won't go through the acronyms now because I'm sure you all know Microsoft has lots of acronyms, but there is a defined process for obtaining money to help you install the StorSimple, and once again ensuring that you get the maximum value.
And the other thing to say is that simple is really StorSimple makes sense in a sense because you can install the appliance very quickly. It's not a very long process, and it's a very simple appliance to install and configure.
Yeah, hi, it's Mark again. So I just want to add some points to that. Actually, it's quite important. I'm just going to flick back to this other slide here. The one on the StorSimple install. The StorSimple install is actually 1 day. It's half a day installing the appliance, half a day updating it, because obviously some of these come from out of the country, so you need to make sure they're up to date. The second day is user training, and that's it. So essentially after day 1, you're ready to use the device. After day 2, we give some internal training to the internal IT team or the managed service team, wherever required, essentially, or whoever you can get on the phone or in the room. That's how we do it. And the commitment to Azure, just to kind of touch on there, is it covers Azure full stop. So if you commit the 60K or whatever is required to commit to get the StorSimple device, you can use those credits in anything. So you could use it if you wanted to run virtual machines, you know, your backup, your machine learning or data analytics, basically anything within Azure. Now, obviously, that a lot of people usually ask about, does that include 365? It doesn't, unfortunately, because that is still a separate EA. But it is essentially any service you can imagine within Azure. And obviously, if you do get time, there is a little bit more in Azure, as it obviously is expanding every day. And it's always difficult to get a snapshot of what is actually available in there now. There is, you know, some useful links that you guys can go to. You know, if you go to the Azure homepage, it will tell you about all services that are in preview, early beta, and are actually full kind of end user release. But these, you know, this again is just a little snapshot to say that that commitment will be able to use with anything within Azure.
And you can mix and match. So some of it can be storage, some of it can be virtual networks or HD inside, SQL databases, anything. And the other point that I just want to add on is that there was a slight error in the quotation of per gigabyte storage. So the local storage in Azure costs 1.4 pence per gigabyte per month, 1.4 pence, not 10 pence. So it is very, very cheap, as you can imagine.
Great. So we've had just one question through about you know, how can these environments, how can StorSimple, sorry, what type of environments have they been used in? We've seen these being used in raw analytics companies, so they've been running SQL queries actually against these StorSimple devices to give you an understanding, and also in the secure environment, so the kind of the traditional kind of public sector secure, well, very encrypted data assets, basically, essentially. So there is multi-use that they can be used as, you know, a data dump raw file storage compared to actually running queries and SQL queries on StorSimple. So it is, you know, there is a range of uses that can be used for them, and I thought it was quite interesting just to expand on that a little bit. Yeah. So sorry, so quick scanning the questions box there. We've had a couple of questions in about the commitment. Okay, yeah, so we just had a question come in, sorry, about the StorSimple controllers heads to say if they're active or active passive. It is an active passive setup. So if you imagine head A and head B, head A is active, and if there was an issue with that, it would fill over to head B, and vice versa. It's the same with updating the device as well. You do the passive controller first, and then it will flip over and then do the passive controller. So essentially, making sure the update runs effectively on the redundant storage head. We'll be able to, you know, share most of these slides. I know there's been a couple of questions about if we can share the information about the costing. We can definitely do that. I know some of the slides do say Microsoft Confidential. We can summarize the detail and take out the certain elements that we can't share. But as this webinar is recorded, I'm sure we'll be able to go back to it and pause if required, but we'll be able to share all the slides though.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Oh, we've got one more question just pop up. Sorry, Alan here.
Yeah, okay, so we just got a question come through from Alan. It's what is the backup, back-end storage at Azure data centers? As in, what type of storage is used? If we were to say, answer that, what type of storage is used, it's blob-based storage that's being used in the background. Yeah, I've just had a yes come through. Yeah, so the StorSimple uses blobs, essentially. So it's not using tables. So with the blob storage, that's, you know, if you were to look at a StorSimple storage count and look in, you just see a lot of blobs, which wouldn't make much sense, and that's because obviously the data is being encrypted and kind of sharded a little bit there as well for protection.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Mark. So thanks, Mark, John, and Robert for presenting today, and then also thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. As mentioned previously, there'll be a critique form that pops up when the webinar ends. So if you would like any more information or a follow-up call from Bytes, if you just pop that in there, and we will be in touch as soon as possible. Okay, so thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks again to the presenters as well.